Hey, welcome to Leading with Gratitude Live. I'm your host, Chester Elton, the apostle of appreciation. We say give us 30 minutes. We'll give you great information, great inspiration, and a roadmap to create your own culture of gratitude where you work and where you live. We're streaming on LinkedIn Live, YouTube, Facebook, all brought to you from the wonderful people at the Methods Network. Our guest today is really going to be fascinating. I know you're going to love this guy. Is Rohit Bhargava. Let me tell you a little bit about Rohit and his unusual credentials. Rohit, he is on a mission to inspire more non-obvious thinking in the world. He is a #1 Wall Street Journal bestselling author of 7 books, including his latest, The Timely Non-Obvious Guide to Virtual Meetings and Working Remotely. Rohit is widely considered one of the most entertaining and original speakers on disruption, trends, and marketing in the world. And Rohit has been invited to keynote in events in over 32 countries around the world, including, get this, more than 30 countries over the past few weeks from his home studio. Outside of his writing and consulting, Rohit also teaches marketing and storytelling as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. I'm excited to introduce you to my new friend, Rohit Bhargava. Rohit, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really excited. This is going to be a fascinating conversation, I know for sure.
I can't imagine it being anything less with you. Hey, listen, for all our listeners, we're going to take some questions. So if you've got any questions, put it in the chat box and we'll throw it to Justin Levrier, who is the commander of our question command center. Wave to the crowd there. Love the COVID curl. Looking sharp. It's awesome. So, Rohit, tell me a little bit about how you become a non-obvious thinker and why it matters.
Yeah, I've really centered on this idea of being non-obvious, mainly because I think we're surrounded by a lot of obvious, a lot of people saying the same thing, reading the same thing over and over again. And to me, a non-obvious thinker is someone who sees those patterns, sees the things that other people maybe aren't paying attention to, and therefore is more ready to adapt, to be flexible, and to have the reaction to just disruption right now that I think we should have, which is not panic, but flexibility. And I think non-obvious thinking helps you do that.
Now, you talk about non-obvious thinking is actually harder than you think. What makes it so hard?
Yeah, non-obvious thinking, to me, what makes it hard is that it's really easy to get stuck in our bubbles. And what I mean by that is we see the same stories on social media reinforced, and we don't realize how tailored everything we see is to us. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that when you search for something on Google, like if you searched for something on Google and I searched for something, we would not see the same results because everything is being algorithmically driven. And so the big challenge is, how do you break out of that type of thinking? How do you be more open-minded so that you're not the sort of person that says, just because someone doesn't think like me, they must be an idiot, which is kind of what happens to a lot of people, whether they mean for it to happen or not. There's just not a lot of understanding. And I think breaking out of that is one of the most difficult things to do, because it means you have to force yourself to perhaps read or look at things that you don't agree with and go outside of your comfort zone.
So what are some of the ways that you break out of the bubble? Like you were telling me you read some magazines or you go to websites that really no one would think would be in your profile. Is that one of your tricks to break out of the bubble?
Yeah, there's a couple things that I think have really worked for me. One is that I have more than 300 different news sources that come into an RSS feed aggregator that I go through every week to put together a curated email of the most interesting stories of the week. And what that allows me to do is something that I think a lot of people don't do, which is get sources, multiple sources for the same story so that I can form my own point of view. And so whether it's on one side of the political divide or the other side, whether it's from news sources from outside of the US where I live, whether it's news sources that are tailored to somebody who's different than me, the big value of doing that is I can frame my own opinion because I see the same coverage, the same story covered in multiple ways. That's one piece. The other piece is that I consume a lot of media in print. And the reason why I do that is because it's not algorithmically driven. And so these situations where you have, for example, on Netflix, that thumbnail that you see promoting that new show is different to different people based on what they know about you. And in a print magazine, that is impossible. The same magazine I pick up is the same one you pick up. It's the same one that a 16-year-old girl picks up. And so I challenge myself to read those sorts of media that are targeted at somebody who's not like me. So I'll read Teen Vogue magazine. I'll read a Modern Farmer magazine. I'll read a magazine about going yachting, and I've never been yachting. And the reason why I do that is so I can step outside of what I know and into someone else's world. I can see the ads that are targeted at them. I can see the language. It really helps me.
Is it hard to tell your friends that you've been a subscriber to Teen Tiger magazine for like 10 years? Is that something they don't know about you?
Most of them know at this point. I think they know.
It's really interesting when you talk about going to those different sources and breaking the algorithm. We had this, I was thinking about you just last night. My wife and I were just picking out a movie to watch at the end of the day, right? And we went to Netflix. And one of our kids has clearly gone in on our account because everything that popped up was anime cartoons. I thought, I've never watched an anime cartoon in my life. Clearly somebody in our account did, and it flooded our account with anime, which is bizarre. Well, listen, I love. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the funniest thing is I was talking to some millennial aged students that were in one of my classes. And for them, the big eye-opening moment where they realized that all media isn't the same is when they went over to grandma's house to help fix her computer and saw the stories that were coming into grandma's Facebook feed. And all of a sudden, there was this alternate reality of stories that they'd never seen and points of view that they don't hear. And they realized that it's not just someone who's 50 years older than them thinking a certain way because they're old. It's older. It's also that they're getting different stories. They're getting different media.
Yeah. Hey, listen, we'd love to hear your questions. Put it in the chat box and we'll throw it to Justin in the Question Command Center. I know you've got a lot of things that's rolling through your head as I do. I think it's really interesting right now as we look at these algorithms and we look at where we get our sources. It really is interesting right now, I think particularly in the US, this separation that's going through the country because of where you get your information. You'll see one news feed and it'll tell you one story about an event, and another news feed will give you almost 180-degree different story. So as we talk about, bringing people more together, do you think being able to break the bubble would help do that?
I think it definitely would, but I think that perhaps we focus a little too much on this idea of fake news. Like, we hear fake news as a term all the time, and what most people are focused on is the fake part of that, which is like, that's not a real story, that's lying. And I think what we should focus on maybe a little more is the news part, because there's so much of what is called news that isn't actually news. I mean, when you report on something that Tucker Carlson says or something that Rachel Maddow says, I mean, these are opinions that are being presented as news. And what ends up happening is they're predictably going to make people outraged. And it's a form of manipulated outrage because somebody's putting that article out there specifically because they know that you're going to be angry about it, whether you're on this side of the political divide or the other side. And instead of focusing on actual news, everything becomes quote unquote breaking news. And the problem is that it's hard to call it fake because Tucker Carlson actually said that. Rachel Maddow actually said that. So it's not really fake. It's just unimportant being presented as important. And I think the challenge is for all of us is to try and navigate our way through that and say, look, is this worth my time? Because the opposite of love, a lot of people think, is hate, but it's not. The opposite of love is indifference, as in, I don't care. I'm going to make that person who makes me angry irrelevant because I'm not going to give them my time. And that's a different mindset, I think, towards the news.
Excellent. A lot of people follow trends and they talk about trends. What's your definition of a trend? Your title is Trend Curator, so I'm interested in your answer.
Yeah, I for people who aren't familiar with this body of work, I spent a significant amount of time every year for the last 10 years doing a book about trends. And this is kind of the latest version of it. It's called Non-Obvious Megatrends, and it's the 10th and final edition. And the way I think about a trend, the way I describe a trend, my definition of one is a curated observation of the accelerating present. And that to me is really meant to say that we should be paying attention to the signals that are out there and what they tell us about the world. So 2 years ago, I was reading about something called ghost restaurants, which were restaurants that were for delivery only. They were just a kitchen. There was no place to sit. They would just make the food. DoorDash or someone else would come pick up the food and deliver it to you. And now restaurants have been forced to convert into that, but that had been happening 2 years ago. So the signs of what's going on are already here. And a lot of times people think about trends that either they're just guesses or predictions of something that may or may not come true, or they're just fads, as in like, I see this thing and it's a trend. And the analogy I use to kind of describe that is a trend is not seeing flour, eggs, and sugar on a shelf and saying that's the trend, that everybody's going to have flour, eggs, and sugar. But you could turn that into something. You could turn that into a cake. And it could be something, but you have to do some work to it. And to me, a trend is an observation about behavior, not a thing that exists. A trend isn't drones. A trend isn't TikTok. A trend isn't any of these individual platforms or individual products. A trend is a behavior shift.
Excellent. Well, we've got a question from our audience on the bubble. So let's go to the question command center. Justin, what's the question about the bubble?
Yeah, thanks, Chester. Intriguing conversation. I'm really enjoying this. Thanks for being part of the show today, Rohit. First question comes from Amy Balog. She's from the Atlanta area. And she says, first off, just a comment, which is that this is so deeply needed right now. This non-obvious thinking. So she said something about it seems a lot like what's shared by David Gray's liminal thinking, a willingness to move out of the bubble. And so the question is, how do you help people become more open to other people's views? Because people kind of seem resistant to listen and kind of almost threatened.
Yeah, I'd say one of the ways that has really helped me is to imagine a backstory for someone believing what they believe that would help you to make sense of it. Because a lot of times what we end up with is someone who doesn't think the way that we do, and we just don't understand how anyone could ever believe that, right? And here's like a really minimal example, right? People who have dogs sometimes just don't understand how some people don't like dogs. And this is personal for us because we just got a dog. We just got a puppy. So now we're in the category of dogs, and we never had one before. But imagine that someone had grown up and had gotten bitten multiple times or had dogs that were really mean to them, and like they grew up in a certain way. It might be more understandable that they don't like any dogs right now. And that doesn't make it right, but at least it makes it a little more understandable. And sometimes you don't know the backstory of someone. So what really helps me sometimes is imagine that backstory. Imagine what could make someone's behavior a little more understandable. Maybe not permissible or good, but at least a little understandable. And the other thing is I actively encourage people, and this is more of a professional advice, go outside your industry. I'm really lucky. I've spent most of my career working at ad agencies. Now I do a lot of consulting across different categories. And so, 6 months ago, I spent 90 minutes in a training session on how to sell diamond engagement rings because I was doing a talk for a jeweler. Now, most people don't get the opportunity to do these deep dives into multiple industries, but you can choose to go outside of your industry. And when you do, you start to see the world of business a little bit differently too, because you're not having tunnel vision in your own industry.
Particularly now, I've been encouraging my kids just to ask their friends, what is your story? Particularly with all the protests. So look, call your Black friends and just say, how are you doing? Tell me your story. I love this idea of what is the backstory so you can understand where they're coming from, where their opinions have been formed. Like you say, I mean, we always had dogs as a kid. I'm a big dog guy. I could never understand cat people, right? Now my son has a cat and I go, actually, that cat's pretty cool, Well, we've got another question from Justin. So Justin, take it away.
Hey there. I'm just surfacing these great questions and appreciate everybody in the audience surfacing them up. Keep them coming. We're paying attention and see your comments. This one actually comes from Allie in Detroit. And Allie writes that she likes your thoughts, Rohit, on print. And I do too. I think it's phenomenal. I might actually subscribe to Teen Vogue magazine after we get off this show. So she says, do you think we can use this opportunity to reestablish journalistic integrity to traditional media like magazines, newspapers, etc., and then have them branch off and get back to producing better quality work that's unhindered by this 24-hour news cycle?
Yeah, I think that we can all take some level of personal responsibility to support real journalists. And what I mean by that is the platforms where these journalists are sharing actual stories, like, become a subscriber. I mean, if you see a certain news source that's giving you valuable content and you're consuming it for free, choose to pay a couple dollars a month. Choose to think about it the way you might think about charity, even though it's not charity. Like, the mindset of being charitable is, this is important, I need to give my money to it, and I'm not necessarily expecting something back from it apart from feeling good about myself. And media, you do get something back for it. You get access to content. Now, maybe that content's already free, in which case it's easy to say, well, why should I even bother paying for it? But choosing to support real journalists and choosing to support media is important. And I think there was this past week, there was a great piece in the Patriot Act, the Hassan Minhaj show, where he talks about the importance of specifically local newspapers and why we need to support them, because oftentimes the big stories that break start off in local newspapers. And that's key. I mean, I think we have to make a choice to support that.
You talk about, even in your own writing, you've rewritten the same book 10 times. I think that's fascinating. Every year you come out with the new non-obvious. Talk to me about that process, how you took one idea and for 10 years kept expanding on it. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, fascinating and a little crazy, I have to say. As a fellow author, I think you'll appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, the latest version of the book just came out in January. But the first time I did it, I mean, this is what the first version of the book looked like. And then kind of it went on every year, and each year there was like a new version of it that had the year on the cover, right? And the idea behind each one of these editions was that I would share the most updated trends from each year and do it in a timely way so that it would be most useful for people. And most of the trends, I wasn't just talking about the trends, I was also giving people actionable advice. And what was really interesting about being able to do it in non-obvious mega trends, the last version of the book, is that it helped me to take all of these insights, 100+ trends, and put them all together into some bigger ideas, some so-called mega trends, what I called mega trends. And the mega trends were this description of how the world's changing. And it came out in January, and then we had a global pandemic 2 months later. And so the question that everybody asks, as you well imagine, you're probably already thinking it, is, were they right? I mean, did they come true? Did they not come true? Like, what happened, right? And I started talking about how the trends we're describing, in the methodology that I use, the trends were not predictions of something that might happen. They were describing something that was already happening that I was predicting would accelerate. And what happened because of the pandemic is many of those things accelerated much faster. So distance learning, for example, all of a sudden, all of our kids are at home and they're all forced to do distance learning. And now that whole trend, or at least the idea of the trend, which is encapsulated with a bigger idea that I called instant learning, which was the idea that we expect to be able to learn anything faster now because we have access to YouTube, we have access to all of these different tools. That was accelerating. And that to me has been really interesting to watch, and a huge opportunity for people, both in their careers and their business, to think about, like, what is accelerating now because of what's happened.
Excellent. You laugh about putting out your book in January, and then 2 months later, there was a pandemic. We put out our book on March 3rd, and 2 weeks later, there was a pandemic. So I feel your pain. Hey, Justin's got one more question about... Yeah, Justin's got another question about trends, so we'll throw it to him. Go ahead, Justin.
Thanks, Chester. Yeah, and before I do, I just want to give a quick shout out to Shane in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. He was chatting to you, Rohit, and says, thank you. Since so much content is free, too few people choose to support real journalism and non-biased points of view. So just a real quick shout out to Shane. Thank you for writing in, and thank you, Rohit, for being on the show. Question is from Raul in California. Question is this: is there a good data set source which I can use to run trend predictions?
So trend predictions to me are very curated, and I use this word often. I mean, it's in my title, trend curator, right? And if you think about the word curation, oftentimes the place we know it from is museums. And what museum directors do is they look at the range of artwork that they have, and when they're creating an exhibit, they decide what to show, but also what not to show. And that's the art of curation. It's bringing the most important stuff to the front and telling a story around it. And so I use a lot of data. I look at data sets, but the art of curation is really an art. It's not a software-based thing. Not that you were suggesting that, but it's not based on the spreadsheet. It's based on intuition. It's based on saying, well, if I see this thing happening over here, and I see it happening in multiple places, that means something. And that's what you're trying to think about, to open your mind to be able to think about it in that way.
Interesting. So what can our listeners do with all this stuff? And is it still valid, particularly with the backdrop of the protests and the pandemic?
Yeah, it's easy for me as somebody who talks about trends and who's participated in a bunch of these sort of gatherings of futurists to get academic about this stuff. But one of the reasons why I did this book every year is because I didn't want it to turn into that. I mean, I'm a professor, but I jokingly describe myself as an occasional professor. I only teach one class a year usually, and sometimes I take time off because I'm writing. So I have a little bit of that academic mindset, but I'm much more concerned in taking these trends and using them, helping people use them as sparks to inspire new ideas. And that's what I believe real great trends can do. They can spark a new idea. They can inspire you to do something different. So just to give you an example, I mean, I used that idea of instant learning, which I was seeing in many places, which is a mega trend that I mentioned. That led me to create an entirely new series around the Non-Obvious brand. And one of the reasons why this is the last edition, this 10th and final edition of the trend book, is because we've launched many other books around the same brand. So, we created a bunch of these, like I wrote one of these guides to small business marketing, and it's like a non-obvious guide. And this whole thing is sort of a series, right? And there's many other authors who are all writing these guides. And the idea behind each of them is that they're written as if you're having coffee with an expert. That's the idea of it. And the latest one really I got inspired to write probably about 8 weeks ago and did super quickly. And it's the Non-Obvious Guide to Virtual Meetings and Remote Work. And the idea behind this one was that's what we all are trying to do right now. And I know that we talked about this before, but we've got a special way for anybody who's listening right now to get that book totally for free. So as a resource, because we're all struggling with this right now, not selling, just you can go to the single URL and pick up your own copy for free.
Yeah, let's go ahead and put that in the lower third there, Brent, where people can go. We always like to give tools and a nice summation. There it is, nonobvious.com/gratitude for your free copy. And thank you for that, Rohit. That's really generous. So what are 3 things that you can recommend for people to start thinking in a more non-obvious way?
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, the first one to me is be curious. Engage your curiosity and ask questions about things that you don't understand. Have those conversations. I mean, what you said with your kids, asking their friends, like, how are they dealing with this? Like, that's a great thing to do. I love that. Do that. Ask questions. Engage that curiosity. The second big thing I would say is be observant, like pay attention to details, pay attention to what sometimes we don't pay attention to because we've gotten really good at just like, paying attention to like only our phone, and we're sitting there and we're watching something, but we're not really present. And my favorite example of that is just Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, walking down the street in Milan, seeing all of these coffee shops, observing and saying, oh, we should create that in the United States. And that's how he started Starbucks. And imagine today, right? What if Howard Schultz, or what if you were walking down the street anywhere with your phone right in front of your face and you don't notice that, right? You miss out on that chance to see what no one else sees. And that's the second big thing. And I think the last thing is focus on people. Understand human behavior. I mean, every one of the trend predictions that I share is a human idea, and it's about human behavior, because I believe that the people who understand people always win. They're the ones who are able to transcend their career. They're able to lead people. They're able to inspire because they understand what makes people tick.
Awesome. So be curious, be observant, and focus on people. We always end every show with the hashtag find your gratitude. So I'm going to ask you, Rohit, where did you find your gratitude today?
I think it's right in this moment, in the fact that even as much as disruption has happened in the world, I'm still able to sit here in the same place that I was sitting here before, and I'm able to talk to amazing people like you. I'm able to share my thoughts with the world because I have a platform to do that. And just looking at what's been happening over the last several weeks, like part of the big problem, I think, is that a lot of people just don't have that platform. And so I feel so lucky, and I have a lot of gratitude for the chance to be able to share this and have people watch or listen to me, because I know that there's so many people who have amazing ideas who just don't have that platform to share.
Excellent. Let's put that download for the free book up there one more time. And can we find out more about your work at that same website?
You can, yeah. So nonobvious.com, you can see videos and stuff there. We tried to put everything on that one page just to make it easy for people. But what you'll also get when you get that book is you'll get a email that I send every Thursday, which includes the most interesting and non-obvious stories of the week. So if you don't have time to go through hundreds of RSS sources a week, no problem. I'll do that for you. And I'll share the most interesting and unusual stories that maybe you haven't heard every Thursday. So hopefully that's of value for you. And that's kind of one of my missions, to share those sorts of stories, to not only help you be more non-obvious and open-minded, but also to just help you be more interesting. I mean, I think that people who have these unusual sources, like, they're just more interesting people.
Excellent. Listen, it's been a pleasure to know you. I count you as one of my new friends. Thank you for your wonderful offer. And thanks so much. I'm sure we'll stay in touch. Take care. And now a closing word from our sponsor at Harper Business Books. This is the less than obvious commercial that we show about our wonderful book, Leading with Gratitude. There we go. Alan Mullally said, I love, love, love this book. And here's the not so obvious call to action. Buy me, buy me, buy me. Hey, listen, we're wrapping up here. On our next show, we are going to welcome Hartmut Essler. Hartmut has been a consultant for 42 years. He is incredibly fascinating. He helped design the Walkman, the Discman, and your iPhone. He's going to talk about leadership. He's going to talk about design. Don't miss it. He is fascinating. We say join us for 30 minutes. We'll give you great information, great inspiration, and a roadmap to create a culture of gratitude where you live and where you work. I want to say thank you to Justin LeVrier in the Question Command Center. Another great job. To the world's greatest online producer, Brent Klein. Thanks to all the wonderful people at the Methods Network. And if you are looking to produce a show like this, get a hold of our friends at the Methods Network. And for past episodes, you can go to methodsof.com/network. We're looking for another great show on Thursday, and it's the same bad time, the same bad channel. And we hope through all of this that you're becoming a little more grateful, a little more kind, and a little more patient. Hey, I'm grateful to have our time together. Take care. That's our show. I'm out. Cheers.